tonight on Focal Point
is that there's 79 million which could and should have been spent to help the most vulnerable in our community, and it's still sitting in Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness's bank account.
And there was 2 cases in my street of suspected human trafficking, so the neighbors were rattling around and saying there's something suspicious about that house. They did ring the police. So I think I did have some insight into what human trafficking is, but it's just maybe what would I do as an individual if I maybe was suspicious.
Arthritis can affect any age group. It means that you've got inflammation in your joints. There's also arthritis affecting children in our community. There are 500 kids in Northern Ireland with arthritis.
In 2011, the government set aside an amount of £80 million to launch the Social Investment Fund, specifically aimed at socially disadvantaged areas in Northern Ireland. It is now 2015, and with only £1 million spent, groups are left increasingly frustrated at the lack of movement, especially in an era of austerity cuts to grassroots organisations. With me today is UUP leader Mike Nesbitt, who is lobbying passionately to get these funds released. Where did the Social Investment Fund originate from?
The Social Investment Fund is a programme for government commitment, so it's been around since the start of the mandate. It has £80 million in the budget. Half of it was to be spent on dereliction and the other half on people suffering from deprivation. And the whole £80 million was to have been spent by the end of March of this year, at the end of the last financial year. And what emerged yesterday from officials in OFMDFM is that only £1 million, 1 million out of the 80, has been spent. So you have ministers, including Martin McGuinness in OFMDFM, howling at the moon about austerity coming out of London and its impact on the most vulnerable. And now we find out he actually has £79 million in the bank that he could have been spending to helping the most vulnerable.
When did the alarm bells first start ringing about the lack of expenditure of this fund?
Well, it has been clear for quite some time that there has been delays in the process. And I blame OFMDFM because I don't think they consulted properly, they didn't plan properly, they didn't realise that once they started this process that there were going to be delays caused, for example, if the community said they wanted to take over a derelict building, that it would take time to establish who the owner was, to do the transaction, to get the planning permission to bring about the improvements and the transformation. And that is down to a basic lack of consultation, and that, to some extent, is a characteristic of DUP and Sinn Féin in OFMDFM. I refer you to Together Building a United Community, which they brought forward without even consulting their 3 partners in the executive.
How have the OFMDFM responded?
We haven't had a response from OFMDFM as yet. The briefing that the committee got yesterday was from officials. We have had a commitment that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister will come to committee before the end of the mandate. Of course, that commitment was made before the First Minister took ill, and again I wish him a full and speedy recovery, and we will have to see whether that can go ahead with Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness, or whether we look at alternative arrangements.
There has been criticism on the excessive use of consultants as a delaying tactic. What are your thoughts on this, and do you know what has been paid to them?
I don't know exactly how much has been paid to consultants. I know there was an issue with the consultants and the quality of the work in the South Belfast zone. There are 9 zones, and actually I think the idea was good to say that we will let the people decide on a bottom-up approach what they want in their communities. But these zonal advisory panels were supposed to be made up of people from the statutory sector, the voluntary sector and the business community, and a lot of business people did not end up sitting on those advisory panels. And I asked the question yesterday, had any advisory panel not had any business input over the last 3 years? And the officials weren't even able to answer that very basic question. But if you're having the statutory bodies and the voluntary communities represented on a panel, there is merit in bringing in professional advice, consultancy. So I'm not critical of the principle of that. Nor am I critical of the fact that the money that has been paid out largely has gone to consultants, because it is front-loaded in those terms. But what I am critical about is that there's 79 million which could and should have been spent to help the most vulnerable in our community, and it's still sitting in Peter Robinson and Martin McGuinness's bank account.
Why do you believe there has been a halt on the spending of the 79 million?
I think the issue is that they were overambitious because they didn't consult. If they had consulted, they would have realised that their timelines were far too ambitious. They would have then done a better plan, a more realistic plan, and a plan which would have given people confidence in the ability of OFM and DFM to deliver. And I believe that confidence is absolutely rock bottom amongst the community. My biggest criticism, I think, of those at the heart of this government is that they are obsessed with process, the inputs of government, rather than with the outputs and the outcomes. And the outcomes for the Social Investment Fund are to improve the areas that people live in, the areas that are suffering dereliction, and also to help the people who are living in deprivation.
I did not know one single word of English, and I had never seen a man's body.
The play is designed to raise awareness about the issue of human trafficking in the UK, in the world, but specifically there are elements in it that are localized to Northern Ireland.
You have to let your face make smile when the men come.
Can you tell us a bit about the characters that you play?
The character I play is Yelena, who was trafficked at the age of 17. She's now in her mid-20s. And Yelena has become like the madam of the house. She's become complicit with the traffickers. She's a victim herself, and in order to keep herself safe, she has become a henchwoman for the traffickers. So she's the one who makes sure that the girls are kept in line in the house. She's the one who has freedom of movement, and the one who is trusted.
I play the character of Monica. She's been very, very recently trafficked into Northern Ireland. Very young character, probably comes from a rural community, high chance that she's illiterate, maybe doesn't have a birth certificate, and no concept of what really has happened to her. And throughout the play, I'm in shock. I'm unable to deal with the reality of what's happening to me, and under complete control of Elena.
Can you tell us a bit about this play, what you thought about it?
Well, I thought it addressed issues of what do you do as somebody who's concerned. You know, I think police, for some people, is not the way to go. But if we know that women's aid are in this as well, and then the human trafficking itself, you can contact them directly. For me, even if I do suspect something, I was always afraid of maybe what the police going to say, because there's intimidation there maybe from the police. So I think it's nice to know, or it's a relief maybe to know that you can go to Women's Aid and other agencies and they can do that on your behalf.
Human trafficking is really hard to assess exactly how big of a problem it is, just because it's so underground. But in the last year, 45 people were rescued, and that's up from the year before by quite a high percent. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's more trafficking. It might mean that people are more aware. It's just really hard to get exact figures for. But I'd say, as a small island, because its connection to both the Europe through Ireland and UK, it's more of a transit port town as well as a destination. So it's utilised a lot for human trafficking. Whether there's that much going on right here is hard to tell, but I wouldn't say it's any more or less than anywhere else, and we especially shouldn't take more people being rescued as an indication that it's thriving at all. The more we're aware, really, the less it will happen, because it will become people will be more fearful to kind of participate in it over here.
Generally, what this workshop does is it raises some of the basic questions about human trafficking. What is it? And we have an opportunity to explain to them the definition of human trafficking, the EU-wide legalized definition of human trafficking. The other things that are asked are about the relationships between people, or relationships between people in communities. What am I going to do if there's something that I don't understand that's happening in my community? So all of these things come up, and some of the questions that are raised have to do with how women treat each other, and what ways in which women are oppressed globally as well as locally.
The play here today focused on sexual exploitation, but there's far more forms of human trafficking than that. Would you care to explain?
Yeah, so there's obviously sex trafficking that we're talking about, and that's important, but forced labour, that's a massive one. Over here, out of the 45 people who were rescued last year, 32 of them, I think, were forced labour, which is obviously a high percentage. I mean, it doesn't, again, it might not necessarily represent what's actually occurring over here, but there's forced labour, there's organ harvesting, there's benefit fraud. There are a lot of people who are trafficked over here and then used for that. There is domestic servitude as well, so it's kind of, we associate trafficking with sex trafficking, but that is not necessarily the case. Forced labour is a massive one as well that we need to focus on.
Well, I come from Portadown today, and I know that there's been incidents that have been reported in the local newspaper, the Portadown Times, that people have been rescued from human trafficking, and there was 2 cases in my street of suspected human trafficking, so the neighbors were rattling around and saying there's something suspicious about that house. They did bring the police, so I think I did have some insight into what human trafficking is, but it's just maybe what would I do as an individual if I maybe was suspicious and those maybe issues were dealt with today, and just to know that behind that door, behind those curtains, it's somebody who's suffering, somebody who's got family, and for me as a migrant myself, you know, it could be anybody.
For someone watching this who may be suspicious that some illegal activities going about in their area concerned with human trafficking, what advice would you give to them?
If you can kind of spot the signs available on the No More Traffic website, if you just read through them and see what you think is applicable to them, and you call the police if you don't want to remain anonymous. If you do, call Crime Stoppers, and if you really don't want to go to the police that way, you can go to No More Traffic, Women's Aid, Migrant Help, and kind of tell them the signs and they can go to the police for you. But just most importantly, tell someone. Don't try and get involved too much yourself unless you're speaking to the person, then you can kind of divulge a bit more information. But yeah, definitely just tell whoever you can.
Arthritis is a condition that affects over 10 million people across the UK on a daily basis. And with an ageing population, those figures will continue to rise. In the studio with us today are Andrea and Gillian from Arthritis Care. They're going to talk to us a little about the condition and what treatments and care are available to those affected by it. Gillian, can you tell us a little about arthritis and what age groups it can affect?
Arthritis can affect any age group. It means that you've got inflammation in your joints. There are over 200 inflammatory conditions of arthritis, but the ones you'll have heard most about are osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia. There's also arthritis affecting children in our community. There are 500 kids in Northern Ireland with arthritis.
Andrea, is it a difficult condition to live with?
I myself was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at the age of 6, so I really haven't known anything else but life with arthritis. And yes, there's different and difficult obstacles that come your way over the years, from living with pain to myself, missing time off school when I was younger, to forming relationships even can be difficult, and sort of keeping relationships even with friends. And when your friends are going out dancing or going ice skating, and you're not able to go because maybe it's going to cause too much damage to your joints, or you're in such a lot of pain. So there was a lot of times over the years that I felt that I was missing out on a lot of things. And then, as you get older, maybe you do meet somebody, you're always thinking about the other person, the things that you maybe can't do with them, such as, go out for nice walks along the beach, or, even sometimes the tiredness is so extreme you can't even have the energy to maybe even go out for dinner with your partner or your friends and family. So that has a big impact on just even your day-to-day life. It does.
And Gillian, when were you diagnosed with arthritis?
I was diagnosed at a later stage in my life, in my 30s. Up to then I'd been very active, and I went to the doctor because I actually thought I had a sports injury. He did point out that I had the same pain in both wrists, which was a bit strange for me if it was a sports injury, and I had the same feeling of pain in both feet. So I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in my 30s, and that was in 1985, quite a long time ago, so it was hard for me to find out information about it. I put all my care in the hands of the doctor. There was no internet to get information from. I had had a very successful working career up to that time. I was married, and I think you do not realise that you're going to get an illness that's going to last continually. You assume that you're going to go to the doctor, and after a few weeks, maybe a couple of months or some surgery, the doctors will fix it. It's quite a different thing when you're waking up each day in pain, and while you're reassured and assisted by your doctors and given lots of tablets to control the pain, it's not really going away, and they're beginning to tell you that that's how your life is going to unfold. It's really quite frightening to have to learn to live with pain at that time in your life when everybody else seems to be just developing into all the activities we expect from life.
And Gillian, can you tell us a little about your work as an arthritis care worker?
Yes, I think one of the great discoveries for me early on in the time that I first experienced my own arthritis was getting in touch with arthritis care. And for people with chronic illnesses, they were already rolling out self-management programs. And that gave you a chance to go along and meet up over a 6-week period, other people with arthritis, and come to terms with the fact that everybody was doing the best they could, but you maybe needed to start focusing on how you would become a better self-manager. Instead of fighting the illness all the time and being very angry with the world and angry with your health professionals, you learnt some better coping techniques, how to action plan, for example, so that you could break down tasks that previously you had done without thinking. You started analysing them and breaking them into chunks that you could manage over a week rather than doing them all in one day. And this helped build up my confidence that I could still manage to achieve things. The course worked so well for me that I decided when they invited some of us if we'd like to volunteer as well, that I could become an arthritis care volunteer trainer. And they give you wonderful training to become a trainer yourself, and then the great support while you're doing that. So all over Northern Ireland there are self-management courses available. You can find out about them on our arthritis care website. They'll be held in leisure centres or local libraries, somewhere that's a non-medical environment where you feel more comfortable and you're talking about in confidence and safely with friends and people like yourselves about the problems you face with arthritis, and you learn breathing techniques, relaxation techniques, how to be a better communicator, not just with your family, but also with health professionals. You tend to be very angry at the beginning, but we try and change that angry communication into assertive communication, where the other person isn't feeling your anger, but really hearing what you're saying about your condition.
And can you tell us a little more about the charity itself and what kind of work it does?
Arthritis Care is a charity that exists throughout the United Kingdom. We're very active in Northern Ireland, and based on the Shore Road in Belfast, we have a great director and a marvellous team of staff. I don't know how they manage to do all the work they do. We've run a variety of projects. We have a youth and families programme, and that's very important in helping young people who are maybe coming to terms with this very painful condition, but maybe also the side effects of the drugs they're taking make them put on weight, develop very puffed up cheeks, or perhaps their joints are beginning to look different than everybody else's and they have to opt out of classes, so they feel different than their friends at school. So we try and run activity weekends, we run positive image workshops for them, and that's very successful. But then look at the other side. Arthritis is a kind of condition in your later years that tends to make you draw in your boundaries. You can become very lonely and isolated at home. We've got funding from the big lottery for a Staying Connected project, where elderly people are befriended in their homes, and we use some of the self-management techniques from our training courses to help them develop the confidence to get out and about again, do some small program of exercises and become more mobile and get more active and meet up with their friends. We've been very keen also on stressing the importance of exercise for everybody with arthritis, whatever your age, and the FIT program, which has recently taken place, Fitness, Information and Therapies, has been very successful, introducing a range of chair-based exercises and activities for people with arthritis. We've just published a chair-based exercises DVD, which is available from the Arthritis Care Office in Northern Ireland, if anybody wants to ring up and buy that.
What do you think about the HSE here in Northern Ireland? Do you think they prioritise arthritis care and treatment?
No, I don't think they do, even though there are so many people that are living with all the different forms of arthritis. And obviously we have an ageing population, so there's going to be even more people living with this condition for longer periods of time. And I don't obviously think, or actually think that the help and support is there for people, especially in the long term. People are going to be living with this condition, as I say, for many, many years.
1 in 5 visits to the GP is about an arthritic condition, and that's a big cost on the economy, and we're often known as frequent flyers in the GP surgeries because they can't really do anything to help us. Arthritis Care and all of us as volunteers have worked very hard to lobby Stormont about getting improved treatments for people with arthritis, because in our lifetime, in the last 20 years, there have been some new drugs made available. They're very expensive drugs, but it's most important that we keep supplying those drugs to newly diagnosed people with inflammatory arthritis.
Could you tell us what signs should people look out for if they think they might have the condition and feel like they should look into it?
I think first and foremost, most people will find the first symptoms will be pain, pain maybe in 1 or 2 of their joints. Alongside tiredness, a lot of people get very fatigued when they have any kind of arthritis, because your body's trying to cope with this condition. So generally, you know, any extreme tiredness, pain in the joints is usually the first thing that would maybe send somebody off to see their GP, would be their first port of call. From then, generally would be referred possibly to a consultant rheumatologist, and there they'll do further blood tests and find out from there whether it would be an x-rays also too, to see if there's actually an inflammatory arthritis going on or if it's osteoarthritis.
And any final words from yourself, Gillian?
The condition affects your joints mostly, but remember that the experience you have in your joints will also affect your feelings and your emotions. So families, friends, co-workers, look out for those signals of sadness and depression, frustration. It's also equally frustrating for those people because it can be a fluctuating condition, particularly an inflammatory arthritis, which may rage for 6 or 7 months and the person's hardly able to move, but suddenly they may have a release for a couple of months where they're bouncing around again, walking, running, and you think, oh, there's not a thing wrong with them. And then the condition comes back again. We don't know why. So there's all the frustrations to deal with. So it's about everybody keeping their channels of communications open and learning to understand this illness that we describe with one word, arthritis, but has such a tremendous impact on us all.
Thank you, and thank you both very much for coming in today and talking to us about arthritis care.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And now, tomorrow's weather.